how important trust is amongst teams and how great leaders establish a high level of trust within their organizations.
The best way to build trust is to be yourself and be wide open, vulnerable. No pretending, no jockeying, no positioning, being completely who you are authentically, because pretending is the heaviest steel in the world.
Welcome to Opportunity Accelerators, the show where professionals at any stage of their career can learn how to level up from those that have found success and have the scars to prove it. Our goal is for this show to sort of be like a mentorship and a podcast, but we'll also talk about other topics such as the tech industry and in particular, how we can create more and better pathways to great jobs. I'm Vince Verga, here with my friends and business partners, Justin Vianello and Joe Mitchell. What's going on, gentlemen?
How are we?
How's it going?
Joe, can you comment quickly on that t-shirt that you're wearing there?
Yeah, this is the new edition. You can get your swag at the merch shop. Opportunity Accelerators. Do you like it, Mark?
I love it.
It's a thing of beauty, isn't it? Imagine how good it's going to look on Vince and myself.
Well, our guest today is Mark Tribus. I've known Mark for quite some time. He's the owner of the Mark Tribus Group. They're an organization with elite coaches focusing on team building and leadership for some of the most well-known organizations in the world. Mark is a graduate of West Point and Harvard Business School. Mark served a 20-year career in the U.S. Army, including Ranger and airborne training. He did a tour with Joint Special Operations Command and a combat tour in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom until he eventually retired from the military as a lieutenant colonel. He's taught leadership programs at West Point and Duke University. He's worked with some legendary sports teams, including the Duke basketball and lacrosse national championship teams. He does a ton of work with leaders in a whole bunch of different organizations, but in particular with Young Presidents Organization, where I had the pleasure of meeting him about a decade ago. I can tell you firsthand the work he does is extraordinary. In fact, he's so great, we asked him to be the keynote speaker at our Skillstorm annual conference this year, and he brought the house down with an amazing presentation. So first, Mark, thank you for your service. Thanks for all you've done to help me and Skillstorm, and welcome to the Opportunity Accelerators pod.
Hey,
Mark.
That was a very generous and kind welcome. So Vince,
All
Joe,
true.
thank you. What a pleasure to be with you, gentlemen. Wishing you the best to your Skillstormers as well as your family. So thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being on. Now, Mark, partly from inspiration of working with you, I know you like to start things with an icebreaker. So we're going to start today with a little bit of an icebreaker. Obviously, you were in the military a long time, veteran, grizzled, hardcore leader. You've done combat tours. So maybe we want to show people a little bit more of your soft side. Can you share with us what is your favorite romantic comedy?
Oh my God.
You got a rom-com favorite?
Sleepless in Seattle. How's that, Vince?
Oh, dear.
And why does that one speak to you, Mark?
Oh my goodness. I think just this idea that you don't know until you know. Identity, what you see is not always true. You can kind of form a relationship with the inner part of someone without really having to judge the outside. So those are probably some of the more important pieces.
Well, Justin wanted to get things kicked off by talking about maybe your early life a little bit and some of your time at West Point. So Justin, what do you got?
Yeah, so Mark, we know you attended West Point. I've got a pretty straightforward question. How did you get into West Point? And was that something you always aspired to achieve?
So when I was 8, I attended a graduation parade. My dad's sister, his youngest sister, was getting married to a cadet in 1976. I just was taken. I was completely spellbound by watching the parade, all the cadets coming out of the sally ports, the kind of the pomp and circumstance, the awe. It was the only place I applied. I didn't apply anywhere else. I got in early. West Point was my first choice. Had this, I wouldn't say weird, but it was a kind of a feeling that the military was the only place for me. So I didn't apply anywhere else. I had this dream of getting in from the age of 8, and it all worked itself out. So that's how I got in.
Okay. What did you study while you were there, and what did you get out of it?
Was thinking I was going to be a physics kind of guy, but realized getting B's in physics doesn't mean you're good at it. And so I ended up doing international politics and Spanish, kind of a minor concentration in Latin America. The most important piece was Spanish, being able to converse, getting a sense of Latin America. I found myself on missions in Panama, in Nicaragua, Costa Rica. Being able to use my language skills was important. International politics was fun at the time, 86 to 90. There was a lot going on in the world, especially in Latin America, but that's what I studied.
What was the biggest thing you got out of it apart from the education while you were there?
There's a concentration on the whole person concept. So mental, physical, moral, relational. As a freshman, you're required to take certain classes like boxing, gymnastics, swimming, survival swimming. There's a big emphasis on not only your academic performance, but also physical. And I like that kind of approach. Even now later at 55, knowing that taking care of self isn't just working hard. It's taking care of the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual aspects of yourself. Born and raised Roman Catholic, went to church every day. These days don't as much, but still at West Point, found myself attending church and doing all those things to take care of myself. So I think the one thing I took away was the whole person development aspect of it. It wasn't easy. Your first 2 years, all you're doing is studying, playing intramurals, working out. Not a whole lot of fun. And maybe that would be the regret, is not having kind of the typical fun college experience. If I could rewind, I would have wanted more of that. So with every yin, there's a yang. But my style, my own personality, a little more conservative, it fit who I was at the time. And it kind of met my needs. It was challenging, just some unbelievable opportunity, especially in the summer times, to go train. I spent a summer out in Hawaii with the 25th Infantry Division at the kind of age of 20, and got to go out there for 2 months or better part of 2 months, and actually train soldiers while I was still a rising senior in college. And so unbelievable resources, fantastic summer training, tremendous teaching, because it's a teaching institution. It's not a research institution. Some unbelievable professors like Scott Snook, a bit of a mentor of mine, went on to teach at Harvard Business School. Those would probably be some of the top topics, Joe, that really kind of impacted me.
You mentioned this gentleman, Scott Snook, was a mentor of yours. What are some of the most important lessons you feel like you learned from him?
There was not a day he didn't come to class when he was all about the students. And so being a practitioner of coaching and leading and mentoring and facilitating these days, I just remember events that every day he came to class, he made it about the students. I know he was married. He had young kids. His wife was also a professor at West Point. Not easy to do, working hard, but just a passion for teaching, a passion for inspiring each of us. I think it led to kind of what I think are the 4 P's of being a masterful teacher. One is you got to be passionate about what you do. Got to have energy. Otherwise you're flat. You got to be personal. Do you see a class or do you see each student? It's kind of like seeing Skillstorm. Do you see an audience or do you see 200 unique human beings in a room? So you're passionate. You're about making it personal. You are professional at all times. I think when I think of Scott Snook, I remember him coming to class. His uniform looked good. He looked good. He knew the lesson plan. He was prepared. He was very professional. No moments of being just sloppy or less than a professional. He was the consummate professional. And I think great facilitators know what they're going to teach, and they're very professional, especially these days when we think about being inclusive and respectful of all types of human beings. And then lastly, persistence. I think when I think of masterful teachers and facilitators, they're very persistent. And the number one place they're persistent is their own growth and development. I always experienced Scott Snook as a learner. He wasn't the expert coming in heavy, telling us what we all needed to know. And again, I kind of, when I was teaching in the master's teaching course at West Point, I thought of the 4 Ps, and I think Scott epitomized that. And so he was my favorite teacher. And to this day, he's probably one of the only ones I truly remember.
At what point did you decide that, that's what you wanted to do? You wanted to be a coach, you wanted to be a teacher, you wanted to help get the best out of other people through, helping them learn. When did you decide that? And do you remember, was there like kind of a moment where it hit you like, this is what I really want to do?
There's definitely a moment. First 8 years, I was an infantry officer. I was in different types of combat units. I was training a lot. I was gone a good bit, especially 94, 95, 96. I flew over to Kuwait a few times. I was gone. I was married, newly married in 95. So from basically 91 to 98, I was gone a lot. I was with combat units. Not easy when you're training, and almost impossible to, raise a family. And so Kim and I, married in 98, 95, almost got out. We were considering calling it quits after 8 years. But then I had this kind of feeling like I wanted to give back, kind of a burning sensation that West Point had really invested in me. And so I wanted to give back. I also came from a mom who was an amazing teacher. She was a Governor's Award winner in the state of New Jersey, teaching high school math. So there was something inside of me that felt like I wanted to test teaching, but I also wanted to give back to the institution. I felt like West Point gave me a tremendous start in the United States Army. So I was offered the opportunity to either teach history or teach leadership. I chose teaching leadership. They offered me the opportunity to get an MBA. I was fortunate, got into Harvard. So from 98 to 2000, while I was on active duty, I was a full-time student. The United States government, taxpayers paid for me to be a full-time student. That was just invaluable, not only to me as a military officer, but as a person. And got to West Point, was excited from 2000 to 2003 to be teaching. But Vince, I will never forget the night I came home from teaching one day, and my wife of 10 years said, "I've never seen you so happy." She was dead on. She goes, "You love this." I said, "I don't love it. This is who I am." And she kind of chuckled. She said, "I don't know why you ever chose to be a military officer." So I'm halfway through my career looking at it, and I actually was doing well. I had been promoted below the zone a year ahead of my peer group. I was doing pretty well, but the lights went on for me when I had the privilege and passion to be in a classroom with human beings that wanted to learn and grow. There were days, Vince, when I couldn't wait to get back to the classroom. And it was life-giving to see that and feel that. And so did I wake up? I don't know if I woke up, but I think I found my purpose and passion in life, which is to inspire others. And the means to do that was in facilitating and teaching. So it was in that moment that I chose to change my career trajectory in the United States Army. I no longer wanted to command a battalion. I no longer wanted to be an infantry officer, and I wanted to be a full-time professor. So initially in 2003, I was considering going down the path of being a full-time professor at West Point for the better part of 30 years, being what they call academy professor. But the war changed some of that. But that's when I woke up, I would say holistically outside the military. I kind of found my dance, which is teaching, facilitating, coaching, mentoring, and team building.
And that's also something that I know you help guide other people towards, is trying to find their purpose. And you just mentioned it, their dance. Do you want to describe kind of what that means to you? And, if somebody is watching or listening to this, what advice would you give them? Why is it important to have a purpose? And what advice would you give them to be able to try to pursue that?
Yeah, that's taking it deep quick. So these are my judgments, and I hold these judgments as mine. I think there's a big distinction between a human being and a human doing. My sense is society propels expectations, validation, and scorecard measurement from the outside inward. My sense is a lot of people follow the path of being measured towards society's standards and expectations. They simply do because they have to. No judgment of them. But my gut tells me they're not really being them best selves. They're not doing their unique giftedness and genius. I do believe that a human being is someone who follows his giftedness and genius, their passions, their unique skill set. I'd say there's not a majority of those types of people who truly know their essence. And again, for all good reason. I think it's noble to support a family. It's noble to have a job. But I do believe, Vince, that people chase human doing, not human being. And it's because of the world that's been created. Everything's measured: bigger, better, taller, faster, prettier, more awards, more accolades, more achievements. And so we measure our own journey extrinsically, not intrinsically. We're just not ourselves. So I believe the pursuit of self starts with, who am I becoming, not what am I doing 5 years from now? Just think about that. It's not what we're doing 5 years from now. It's who we're becoming 5 years from now. I'm sure Joe and I could start a McDonald's franchise. I'm sure we would be successful, but I would be Joe's most miserable business partner he's ever had. Joe, it's just not who I am. Just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. Just because it's tied to wealth, privilege, opportunity doesn't mean I should. Just because I know I could have an amazing business partner help me along in the journey doesn't mean I should. It's not who I am. And so I push people to ask, who are you becoming 5 years from now? Not what will you be doing? And the answer lies in, well, who am I now? Because you're the same person, Vince, 5 years from now as you are now. And so how do you get at that? You got to really reflect upon what makes you happy. And then the intersection of what are you really good at? And if you can ask yourself, what am I happy? What makes me really happy? And what do I tend to do really well? That intersection gets at what Aristotle calls our giftedness. And I truly think you got it right. I think there's 4 fountains of happiness in life. The one model I use with a lot of high achievers is to say that we derive joy and happiness from instant pleasure gratification. That's level 1. Level 2 is achievement. Level 3 is contribution. But Aristotle says pure joy and happiness comes from the giving of our signature gifts and strengths to the world. And so I'll just end with, I do believe we're all unique human beings. Everybody has gifts and signature strengths to share. I just don't know if the rest of us in society allow that to happen.
So Mark, when you were at West Point, you mentioned you had the choice between history and leadership, and you chose to focus on leadership. Can you give us some examples during your time where you've seen really, really good leadership? And maybe you can share with us, maybe some of the challenges or the outcomes that came as a result of that outstanding leadership that you saw.
Sure. So midway through my 20 years from 1990 to 2010, I was given the opportunity to compete and go back and teach. I was selected, and then they said you could teach leadership or you could teach history. And so again, I did choose leadership. If I heard you correctly, Justin, you're asking for examples of good and bad military leadership or good and bad any type of leadership?
Or you could choose whatever choice you want to make, Mark.
Yeah.
Whatever the best example is, you can share with us.
Let me start with the positive because I've got tons of examples of the positive. Many of our listeners, many of you know Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. I had the privilege of working for Coach K for 2 seasons when he was coaching at Duke University. It was 2009 and the 2010 seasons, or actually 2010, 2009 competition seasons. I've been asked many times what's unique about him. Coaches, CEOs, leaders are required to perform. Go figure. You got to make money or you got to win. And I think that's one side of a human being in terms of having teams and human beings. The other side is their development. And my sense is not all coaches focus on the development of their athletes the way they do winning and losing. Not all CEOs focus on each individual professional the way they do focusing on making their numbers and making money. When they do, and they do it well, it's kind of hand in glove and they come together. And my judgment is that a lot of the longevity of Coach K is that he balanced performance, winning X's and O's extremely well with the development of men of character and consequence. And I say that because he's got some great men that were good men. And last I checked, or at least you can go check this, my understanding is that Duke has more NBA players than any other university in the country, or at least for a number of years they did. I think that's testament to Coach K hiring men of character, but developing men of character. And so when I work with teams, whether it's a CEO or it's a coach or a mother, father, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, what's the outcome I expect for my son, daughter, my skill stormer, the professional, the athlete? And if the outcome is that they're well-adjusted human beings that are happy and they're decent and kind, we're probably going to place some emphasis on development. If my outcome is we either win or lose a championship, I'm not so sure we're going to focus on that developmental aspect. And so I give a lot of credit to Coach K as being an example of what I really admire in leaders that have longevity, whether it's a CEO or a coach. Not only do they know how to win and make their numbers and X's and O's, they also place a premium on the development of their professionals or their teammates or their children. And that combination, to me, in a good way, is deadly and dangerous because it gives you staying power. You're not just whipping the horse and then sending the horse out to pasture. So one example of, I think, highly effective leadership is knowing how to blend performance and development and making it personal to each of your athletes or professionals.
That's great. One thing I hear you talk a lot about, Mark, and it was a big part of our presentation that you did for us at the conference, was how important trust is amongst teams and how great leaders establish a high level of trust within their organizations. Can you talk to us about why that's important, and then what are things that not just leaders but team members can do to increase the level of trust with the people that they work with?
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Coach K said it in a speech at West Point. He said, "Without trust, you have nothing." He said it may be the most important word there is. When I was teaching at Duke and I was working with the sports teams, I became more and more aware of the use of the word trust. But honestly, Justin, I didn't know what trust was. So we really started to look into it. We wanted to know more of what are the components of trust. There's some tremendous authors out there, whether it's Stephen Covey, it's Lencioni, a lot of great research, and then mental models and stories about trust. But Meister, Green, and Galford, authors, researchers, really steered us in the direction of what make up the components of trust. I would just share that they talk about vulnerability, reliability, and credibility. And it's all divided by self-interest. So that formula is theirs. But I think it's powerful to think about this, Vince, is that trust is killed whenever there's selfish behavior. And just thinking about that, if I make it about me and it's not about we kill trust instantly. And so on any team, selfish behavior is the kryptonite of what teams can do. And teams are multipliers of what individuals can do. The four of us alone can do something alone. The four of us together on this call, we can do things that are multiples more important and powerful, 16, 20, 30 times more powerful than what we could do as individuals. And so maybe some very clear insights on trust. One, Vince, I learned that trust is not a team, family, company, or sports team component. Trust is human being to human being. I wouldn't say Coach K necessarily taught that to me, but it's what I've learned in working with thousands of teams, whether it's a family team, a sports team, a corporate team, is trust is human being to human being.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of teams forget that. I'll go, we have a high trust team. And then I say, well, Joe and Justin don't talk to each other, and they actually backdoor each other to Mark and Vince. So I say the trust amongst the four of us is governed by the worst relationship. So what's the insight? We got to spend time one-on-one with each other. It's the same insight for a father. I say, oh, you got 3 kids? When's the last time you took your daughter away one-on-one? Well, why, Mark? Because trust is human being to human being on her watch and on her terms, not your busy daddy CEO watch and on your terms. And so maybe one big insight for listeners and learners is the more time you spend with each teammate and the more you require one-on-one time with each skill stormer, you're going to make trust go through the roof. Trust is governed by, again, credible. Are you competent? Are you a person of character? Because if your values are about you and your own personal promotion and not about skill storm or the team you work on, you've just killed your credibility. Reliability is about being consistent. It's kind of like I always tell people, my mom always had dinner on the kitchen table when we came home. You trust people who are consistent, not spotlight, showmen, because you don't trust somebody who does a heart valve transplant really well once. You trust the surgeon because she can do it really well every single time. And so trust on any team is about being consistent for your teammates, not just showing up once or twice and scoring a goal. You got to score all the time. But I think the last piece, Vince, that gets at what you and I have learned through Young Presidents Organization and what I think is the key to trust, whether it's dating your partner, dating a girlfriend, boyfriend, building a relationship in a marriage, building a relationship with a new freshman teammate or the newest intern at Skillstorm, is vulnerability. You guys are going to ask me questions, but I'm going to tell you right now, there's no pretense in any of my answers. I just don't have the energy for it. And so to me, the best way to build trust is to be yourself and be wide open, vulnerable. No pretending, no jockeying, no positioning, being completely who you are authentically, because pretending is the heaviest steel in the world. And when people pretend, it just makes the relationship heavier. And if two people are pretending, that governs the level of trust inside Justin's skill storm. It's not a skill storm trust. It's the trust between the worst two teammates that don't trust each other. That's the governor on trust. To answer your question, that may be a little too long.
So if trust is a foundation of building integrity and building a good relationship and a good team, what are the other core components that help to build and solidify the team? So is it making sure the team has a purpose? Is it making sure the team has a strong leader? Is it around the core values of a team? I'd just love to get your thoughts on that.
Really good question. They say, leadership, management, teams, groups, all semantics. It is not semantics. And so let's just play out loud. Can the four of us play out loud? And would that be okay?
Sure.
Let's do the difference between a team and a group of people standing at a bus stop. Let's just do this. We got a group of people waiting on a bus at a bus stop, and we got a team that plays soccer. What are the key differences?
Okay.
Well, on a team, you need membership. You have to have criteria to be in the team versus the group. At the group, you just stand there. There's no membership criteria. Well, what's the criteria to be a stormer? Some really good criteria. And so when I think of teams, let's make sure your membership criteria are really clear. Skills, abilities, knowledge, background, history, core value set. So the first clear distinction on a team is, if you don't know who should be your members, you're going to let people come in and you start looking like a group in a gaggle, not a team. Justin, what's the difference between a group of people at a bus stop and a team? We have membership as being one. What would be another distinction?
Common purpose.
There we go. Nicely done. Big difference between any team and a gaggle group of people is that they have a core purpose, which gets to, Joe, you said purpose and end state. Key to a team is knowing where you're going. What's the vision and end state? And I always say you can operate to get done what you're supposed to do, like play, but playing alone isn't good enough. There needs to be a purpose about why you play, which is to what? Build a national championship team, to win a divisional championship. There's got to be an end state. And so the difference of high performing teams is that they have a vision and an end state and a core purpose for existing. Joe, you said core values. On any team that unites unique human beings, the way to unite unique human beings is to have core values. We're all unique. We're not going to be the same. But on any team that marches and moves towards a purpose, the way to bring unique human beings together is to say, these are the core behaviors that dictate how all of us will act. Not just Vince, not Justin. We have to take our own personal values and merge them underneath the umbrella or the branches of Skillstorm or any organization. And if we can't, we just violated the first piece, which is membership. I'm just not a good member for the team because my core values don't nest underneath the core values of the organization. So again, I think we've mentioned a few things. Number one, membership, purpose, core values, vision, end state. Teams differ from groups in that they have roles and responsibilities. We define what each team member is responsible for providing. We have governing principles and bodies, call them our norms. A group at a bus stop doesn't, but any high-performing team does. Why? Because Vince and I are eventually going to get sideways with each other. If we don't have principles and norms that govern conflict, we might norm negative and become toxic versus positive and work through our differences. And so just in thinking about teams, I really do believe that each of us has a unique role and responsibility. We suffer and sacrifice for the greater cause. There's a component of trust that's built through vulnerability. We suffer and sacrifice for we versus me. We know why we're there, and we fight hard to achieve the purpose in the end state. Those would be some of the things I think define high-performing teams, Joe.
So, obviously we've all dealt with challenges in our lives and in our careers, some of which sometimes we bring upon ourselves, but sometimes, they're just out of our control. I know you worked with a team at Duke that sort of had something thrust upon them that was a little bit out of their control. Can you talk about that a little bit? Sort of, tell the story and what it was like, and how those kids were able to overcome that circumstance, and your involvement with it.
Sure. I was very lucky, Vince, very fortunate. I showed up at Duke University kind of in the midst of the lacrosse scandal, for lack of a better term. It's been well told on different documentaries. And I showed up on campus. I was the head of the RTC program and got introduced to Coach John Danowski, just a tremendous man, a tremendous leader. Started doing both outdoor and indoor team building with the team and the team captains. I think one insight and lesson learned, Vince, for all of us, no matter what team it is that culture takes time to change. With Coach Danowski coming in, I think there was a renewed sense of purpose around why they existed, which was to play lacrosse and to win national championships and represent Duke well. Maybe move away some of the things that they were characterized as on TV, which I don't think was necessarily true, but to focus more on playing lacrosse and being men of character and consequence. And that was maybe the part where I got involved. I started doing team building with the men's team, and then also did an independent study with some of the lacrosse team captains. Also had the opportunity to teach the first ever leadership class for the women and men teams captains at Duke for a full year. And the journey, I think, for the men's lacrosse team is it just took some time to focus on who they were. Just like any team, it has to find its purpose. Kind of Joe said it before. Why do you exist? Are we here to have fun, or are we here to play and kind of learn and grow and be men of character and consequence and win championships? And I just sensed with Coach Danowski and the lacrosse team, they turned a corner around why they were there. Unbelievably skilled athletes, really good men, and they were not really tapping into that potential until Coach John Danowski got there, and they renewed a sense of purpose around why they were lacrosse players. I also felt that the scandal, which turned the team, fifth-year seniors, some of the men had to skip a year, taught me valuable lessons around the idea of trust, which is connecting one-on-one. It was even harder for John Danowski and the staff to connect all the players because you had fifth-year seniors and you had brand new freshmen who had not been through the scandal and missed a whole season of playing lacrosse. And to me, and watching and then also collaborating and helping, it was getting them to connect one-on-one and to open up and be vulnerable, to see the real man, not just whether you came from a wealthy background or your dad was a firefighter, but seeing the whole person. I think the last thing I'd share, Vince, was something that we've practiced in YPO and YPO forums. And there's a tool that's really, really profound, which is issues clearing, which is getting the grit and cancer out of any relationship. And I would say that the men's lacrosse team was testament to having the courage to consistently get the grit out of one-on-one relationships. And if somebody said to me, Mark, what was one thing you feel separated them from other teams, is that they came together in a way that was truly authentic and trusting because they didn't have grit inside any of their engines. The defense especially, they really focused on being in integrity with each other and making sure that they didn't have conflict holding each other back from truly being in integrity. And that was dangerous. That's when they got to that point where they had unbelievably loving, respectful, trusting relationships and was built upon integrity, and they dealt with their problems, which any team does. I think they turn a corner internally when they started to become really, really cohesive and dealing with problems internally one-on-one as men. And to me, they were unstoppable. So those were some of my insights.
You transitioned in 2010 to your own business, working for yourself. Can you talk to us about that transition? What led to that transition? Just talk us through that.
When I got back from Afghanistan in May of 2005, I had the opportunity, when I was stationed in Lorton, Virginia, I was working at the Army Human Resources Command. I was in a group of leaders, a group of men, some of them military, some White House fellows, a couple executives at different corporations. We would meet once a month for about 4 to 5 hours on a Sunday afternoon, evening. And we would meet just to work on being better fathers, better husbands, better leaders, better, military and corporate leaders. And so it gave me a taste of what it was like to be in kind of a peer support group. That led me to being introduced to Young Presidents Organization, YPO, which is just a fabulous global organization where they invest in like-minded leaders, mostly presidents and CEOs. You have to be a president or CEO to be in the organization. when I started doing that, Justin, I got introduced to facilitating with forums, 6 to 8, 9, 10 CEOs and presidents. I was able, on my personal time with approval from the military, the last 4 or 5 years of being on active duty, to spend time with guys like Vince working with his forum. And I got introduced to just a life-giving kind of an organization called Forums and YPL, this collection of 6, 7, 8 CEOs and presidents who get together on a monthly basis to work on themselves in a whole life capacity, whether it's being a father, a son, a friend, a leader, a struggling husband. It was eye-opening to be able to facilitate these retreats. And so, Justin, that led me to connecting with more and more forums. It led me to connecting with CEOs like Vince, which then led to working with companies and executive teams. And so I was very, very fortunate in 2010 when I was leaving the military. I had a really good book of work. I not only had access to sports teams because of some of the work with Coach K and John Danowski, I had a really good book of work with forums. I had a very good book of work with guys like Vince who wanted to invest in their teammates, and men like you and Joe wanted to invest in their Skillstorm teammates. I had companies calling me. So it was really kind of a three-legged stool. It was working with sports teams, working with corporate teams, and then working one-on-one coaching, which I really enjoy. And that part of my work really took off, is spending time one-on-one with leaders like yourselves. In 2010, it started. In 2014, I grew it and merged with a high school classmate. We grew it up until this past year. And then just recently, I started my second firm. So there you go. That's how my company started.
So that's awesome. So you've worked with some incredible leaders. Is there one thing that really stands out from one particular leader that you may have learned that you've been able to share with other leaders?
I love it, Joe. Leaders come in all shapes and sizes. It's amazing that a different shape and a different size can get to the same end state, which is winning, making money, or building an amazing home with loving spouse and kids. So we all have that potential, is my first response to that question, is that I've met some amazing women and men and leaders, but they're all very unique and very different.
Sure.
Just off the top of my head, Hillary Head, Ram Tool Corporation, inherited the business from her father. Go figure. A construction tooling corporation. Unbelievably gifted woman, but very cerebral and very insightful and intuitive. Doesn't need to lead with a hammer. Led with her own kind of personal savvy and moxie. And people would do exactly what Hillary would want done, but led from a place of compassion and caring, despite losing her husband to pancreatic cancer at a very young age and raising 3 resilient teenagers and human beings when that all happened. And so I compare and contrast her with Dan Amos, the chairman of Aflac Corporation, just deeply, deeply intuitive and insightful. Probably one of the most intuitive leaders I've ever met. And I think as I compare and contrast, Hillary went to Yale, very analytically, brilliantly gifted. Dan Amos, brilliantly intuition. And I think the father of the duck. I mean, I don't know what you guys know about the duck, but I'd say pretty good move on Dan's part, but just a ridiculous intuition. And so Hillary, unbelievable analytics and insight, keen insight because of her intellectual acumen. Dan Amos, unbelievable intuitive insights. And then Coach K, the capacity to not only perform and win in X and O's, but develop his men. They all did it differently. But they all got to the same end state. Brilliantly successful leaders.
Yeah, Mark, obviously had an incredibly successful transition from military to civilian life. It's not always that easy. Of course, one of the big things we do at Skillstorm is we help, train veterans and really high-end tech skills and give them the opportunity to get jobs. But, if you could talk to us about, from the perspective of an employer, and why they might want to hire somebody that spent time in the military. What are some things that they gain in the military that makes them, gives them unique qualifications to be successful in civilian life?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to think about what does the military bring to the world of work. I would say in general, but not all the time, you're getting a product and an individual that knows how to commit to a cause greater than self. They know what it means to commit to company corporate values versus their own selfish needs. And so right there, in most cases, someone with a military background brings a measure of selflessness and sacrifice where they can commit to a company's goals and not make it about themselves. I think that's the first piece that you get from a former military person. Second is the capacity to be disciplined and to commit. It's not easy being asked to do things you weren't normally be asked to do, getting up early, physical training, deployments, being put under very harsh and difficult, physically, mentally taxing situations. And so I don't believe that there's a correlation between the military, the physical aspects, and the corporate world, but I do believe there's an equally challenging courage component, mental component, and relational component. And I think the military really presses those things, the ability to take on risk and overcome it, the ability to be stable in chaotic, very stimulating environments. And then knowing that if you let your teammate down, somebody might die. I think those three components are really important to corporations. And so most soldiers, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guardsmen have a DNA that I think a lot of companies can leverage. And those are some of the basics.
Yeah. No, but well taken, Mark. So, Mark, talk to us about the future. Where do you see your career headed? What sort of aspirations do you have for your company? What does the future look like for Mark Tribus?
That's a great question, Mr. Vince, because I don't believe in the word retirement. I believe in people doing their dance and all the roles they play, whether that's as a grandfather, a grandmother, whether that's as a friend, a neighbor, inside a mosque, inside a synagogue, a church. I think we live our purpose until we die. And so for Mark Tribus, I'll always be doing what we're kind of talking about now. If I'm 98 in a nursing home and my great grandkids walk in, I'm sure one of my great grandkids is going to say to the nurse, "Is my great grandfather giving you coaching and counseling?" And I hope the nurse smiles and says, "Yes, your great grandfather coaches and counsels me every day." And so I think what's next for Mark is that I get to do my dance every day. I'm a lucky guy, Vince, knowing that I get to help support other human beings. I don't think for me there's any greater, more noble opportunity than to support someone. And so I hope I get to do that dance until I take my last breath. The ways, means, shapes, and forms in which I do it these days, I'm collaborating with more leaders like yourselves. I want to make sure that I spend as much time with Kim and the boys as I can. And so I'm mindful to collaborate with colleagues like the four of us, where we can work and serve a client, whether that's an individual or a company or a team, in a way that provides profound, long-lasting impact and lasting effects. I hope I'm doing that. And like I said, until I take my last breath. I love one-on-one work. And so I'm starting to do that more, starting to do more work with families. I find that to be deeply challenging, but so rewarding when moms and dads and partners come together to create a loving, safe environment for children. And so that work is challenging, Vince. I'm doing more of that. But I just hope I get to do this until I get called in a different direction.
Well, I think speak for all of us. We hope you got many, many more breaths to take. You get to continue pursuing these things and helping us out as well as all the other people that you work with. Mark, now we're going to transition to arguably the most exciting part of the show, and that is the lightning round.
Yes.
Woo-hoo!
Are you ready, Mark? Any questions? Any questions you have for me before we get going?
Let's let it rip, Mr. Justin.
Okay. Here we go. Would you ever try stand-up comedy?
No.
Have you ever appeared in a reality show?
No.
Do you think you could win a game show?
No.
Do you speak more than one language?
No.
Do you believe in ghosts?
No.
Do you sleep with stuffed animals?
Nope.
Have you ever won a bet?
Have I ever won a bet?
Yes.
Absolutely.
If you lost a bet, did you actually pay that person?
Yes.
Joe,
write that down. Write that down, Joe. Do you have a bucket list?
Not officially, no.
Would your 12-year-old self think you're cool?
No.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
Oh my goodness. Too many to think about.
Okay. What is your last impulse buy?
A mountain home.
favorite sports team?
Oh my gracious. Too many to count.
Yeah. What mythical creature do you believe is real?
None.
Do you know how to perform a magic trick?
No.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
Yes.
How do you feel about
That's
cranberries?
something you'd say no to.
What do I feel about what?
How do you feel about cranberries?
Juice and Thanksgiving. Great.
All right, that's it. You made it through it.
Now, Mark, I
think we can unpack a whole lot of those answers to those questions, but we don't have enough time.
do have to ask, what would your 12-year-old self think about you?
That dude is very serious, conservative, and he gets a lot of shit done.
All right.
Yes.
Well, that sounds
he got,
to me.
but he got into West Point because your 8-year-old self wanted to get into West Point, so I think he'd be pretty
that
proud of you.
12-year-old was on that train, and that train left the station at age 8. So he had 4 years of experience at being conservative, getting a lot of shit done, and being real serious.
Mark, thank you so much for being on. If anybody would like to get a hold of you, how can they do that? How can they find you?
You can go to www.marktribusgroup.com and read all about my colleagues and the amazing work that they do making a difference in this world.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again, Mark. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Opportunity Accelerators. Until the next time.
This episode of Opportunity Accelerators has been brought to you by Skillstorm, where our purpose as an organization is to launch and accelerate tech careers. Please be sure to like and subscribe to catch the next episode.